Hello, Happy New Year's, and welcome back for our final session of this webinar series. This is part 4, a call to action for the Sickle Cell ICER review. The web series is hosted by SICKLE. My name is Maggie Jalowski, and I'll be the presenter today. On the call, we also have Ashley Valentine, who is one of our co-founders and CEO. And additionally, we have Adrienne Shapiro, who is one of our board members. You'll hear a bit more from them in a bit. For any new attendees, here's some information about our organization. SICKLE is a nonprofit organization that seeks to elevate the voices of the sickle cell disease community. We do this through storytelling and advocating for patients and caregivers. We aim to empower patients to share their stories and ultimately influence policymakers, employers, health administrators, and providers to act and improve the treatment and care for sickle cell disease. SICKLE is based in the Chicagoland area. Over the last few weeks, we have hosted a 4-part webinar series on value assessments and drug pricing. If you are just now tuning in, don't worry, you can still catch up on our previous sessions by checking out our website. All of our webinars are recorded and they are available to watch for others in the future. Some brief housekeeping before we begin. All attendees will be in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. However, this doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you. We hope to have everyone engaged, and especially during the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. After some of the previous sessions, we've heard that attendees have had some challenges, so we want to review how you can submit questions. If you look at the GoToWebinar platform, there should be an area titled Chat, and you can submit questions through us throughout the presentation. You do not need to wait until the end. All of the questions will be compiled, and then we will take some time to answer them at the end of the webinar. If we do not have the answers to your questions, we will find an expert that does and follow up after the webinar. Today, we will hope to summarize the information that we've shared throughout the 4 webinar sessions. We also hope that this session will help tie together all the topics that we've been talking about. And then specifically, we're going to talk about how we need our community to get involved. The next few months is a really busy time, specifically for the ICER review. And we're going to talk about ways that the community will impact the report. After today's session, there will be specific action items for our patients and for our family members. And we'll talk about why your engagement is so important. So as we know, 2019 was a very exciting year for sickle cell disease. On November 15th, the FDA approved VO. Then on November 25th, FDA approved Oxbryta, both of these approved for the treatment of sickle cell disease. So as these new drugs emerge onto the market, a new conversation becomes really important. These questions that emerge are, how much are these drugs going to cost? How are patients going to be able to access them? And how valuable are these new treatments? Well, when we talk about value, we talk about how important or worthy or useful something is. And spending more money does not always equate to getting better value. So often we need to make decisions about what the value of the product is and if it matches the price tag. In healthcare, these decisions are very similar. So who's the one determining value for services in healthcare? Well, currently there's a nonprofit organization called ICER who is assessing the value of these 3 sickle cell disease treatments that we have identified here on this slide. Some of this will be a review from our previous sessions, but how does ICER determine the value of these treatments? Well, ICER is an organization that uses value assessment framework to produce a report which describes the value of new treatments. And they've developed their own value assessment framework that uses health economics, which includes a very detailed math problem that helps us look at value. It takes 8 months for them to complete their assessment, and at the end, they produce a final report that will provide an overview of the value of these treatments. Value assessments include a look at the clinical and economic value of the treatments. So they do this by comparing the cost and the outcomes or the effects of what the treatments can help us do. So why is this all important? Well, because insurance companies may use these reports when they are making their decisions. Again, we talked about this during our part 2 webinar, but we understand that there's a lot of stakeholders involved that help make decisions about how we're able to access and afford our drugs. And different stakeholders, including insurance companies, may use this to determine how much coverage they're going to provide for these new treatments. So for example, they may look at the ICER report and say, I understand the value of this drug, therefore I'm going to reimburse X amount for this drug. Ultimately, these decisions may affect how easily we as patients and advocates can access and afford the drugs in the future. So again, this is really important for our community during this time. So how do we go about defining value? Well, value means different things to different people, and what matters to patients is not limited to always what's measured in clinical trials or what's defined as a clinical outcome. And so we must remember that patients are really at the center of this, and they need to be the overarching goal of achieving high value as defined by patients. In order to do so, the patient's voice is critical. And they need to be able to understand that what patients feel are important to determine how valuable products are. This, by hearing the patient's voice, ICER and people conducting value assessments will be able to understand how vast the need is for patients to be able to access new medications. As patients, we can help share our story to help ensure that ICER understands the impact that sickle cell disease is having in this country and the desperate need that there is for new treatments and different alternatives. This slide demonstrates some questions that ICER needs to ask in order to assess value for these new treatments. For example, their analysis will ask how effectively can each drug reduce healthcare costs, or how likely is it to improve the quality of patients' life? Well, in order to answer these questions, they need to hear from you. What are your current healthcare costs? How does sickle cell disease currently impact your quality of life? One really important question also relates to caregiver burden. We, as patients, understand the impact that sickle cell disease has on families and caregivers. However, this is often not measured in clinical trials or included in other research data. So by sharing your story, ICER can get a better idea of the impact sickle cell disease has on caregivers, and then be able to use that when defining value and looking at new treatments that may be able to reduce some of the caregiver burden. These are some examples of why the patient voice is really important. Now, let's walk through the timeline for ICER'S review. More information about the specifics of the timeline can be found on their website. However, we've outlined some important milestones that are coming up in the next 4 months. During today's webinar, we'll walk through the specifics of each of the steps, and then most importantly, we're going to highlight where you, the sickle cell disease community, can get involved each step of the way. So the first one looks at what we've been working on since August in 2019. ICER had initially announced their topic back in August, and since then they've been in what they call the report development phase, which means that they've been collecting data and beginning their analysis. So over the last 4 months, they've been collecting their data and preparing their economic model. And they do this by collecting information from drug manufacturers and other stakeholders that can share information about the benefits and outcomes of the treatments that they're looking to analyze. During this time, SICKLE has also been meeting with ICER too, and we've been working to identify areas of the report that may have limited data or shortage of information that will be important to help them define value. Specifically, ICER has helped us highlight some questions where they may feel that there's a shortage of information. And now SICKLE is going to help field a survey that can collect information on some of these areas where data may be limited. Specifically, information on how the sickle cell disease has impacted patients' productivity, or what are the out-of-pocket costs that patients pay, or how does this disease impact the life of caregivers? All of these are areas where there may be gaps, and we hope that this survey can help fill in and address some of these questions. So, how can you as patients and caregivers get involved in this step? Well, we hope that you complete our survey. The survey will go live online next Thursday, January 16th, and it's titled My Life with Sickle Cell Disease, Patient and Caregiver Survey. This will be available online for 2 weeks. And we need as many patients and caregivers as we can to complete this survey and help collect the data that ICER needs to conduct a more accurate assessment of value. The next step will occur when ICER releases their draft evidence report. The draft evidence report is the summary of cost effectiveness analyses that they're conducting. And this report will also contain the recommendation of the price range that ICER believes is fair for these new drugs. The draft evidence report will be released on January 22nd. This will be a draft version though, since changes from the report will be made once ICER receives additional feedback or data. For example, the data from the My Life with Sickle Cell Disease survey will be incorporated after the draft evidence report. So how can the community get involved at this step? Well, if you're interested in learning more about the specifics of the report and the way that ICER conducts these math calculations, there will be many opportunities to learn about this. An organization called PIPSI, or Partnership to Improve Patient Care, is collaborating with SICKLE and many other sickle cell disease organizations like the SCDAA, the National Minority Quality Forum, and the Sickle Cell Disease Coalition. And together, the sickle cell disease community and PIPSI will host other webinars to talk about this topic and help explain some of the details that are included in the draft evidence report. This will help you understand a little bit more about the measurements that ICER uses to make their value assessments. So if you're interested, you can join us next week for the PIPSI webinar, and we've included information about the webinar at the end of our presentation. Additionally, the community will continue hosting these webinars to keep everyone engaged and informed about the specifics of the draft evidence report. Next, the open comment period will begin. So this is from January 22nd to February 19th. And during this time, all stakeholders, including patients and caregivers and clinicians, will have the opportunity to provide feedback and write input on ICER'S evidence report. So SICKLE will be writing our own letter on behalf of our organization to highlight any of our concerns and comment specifically on what we think about their evidence report. However, we also need to hear from the rest of the community. We need to hear from patients and caregivers and clinicians, and we need you to write letters too. Everyone has a different story to share, and it's important for ICER to hear from individuals. There will be 4 weeks for you to submit your letters to ICER via email. Some of you may remember a similar effort back in September when ICER first announced the topic of their sickle cell disease review. There was a public comment period for the draft scoping document, and those comments that they received were incorporated into a revised scoping document. During this first comment period, our community showed up, and it was a huge success. ICER received over 100 letters on behalf of the sickle cell disease community. However, now we need to do this all over again, and we need to show up in the same numbers and with just as successful as an outcome. We need to continue sharing our stories because the comments that we provide during this round will actually impact the final evidence report. And again, this is the report that's ultimately used by insurance companies and other stakeholders. So we need to ensure that our stories are incorporated into this report. So how does the community get involved? Well, we encourage you to write letters to ICER during this time period. We need you to share your stories. SICKLE will have more information about how to do this in the coming weeks. We'll be sharing guides and materials on our website, so please stay tuned and to learn more, but know that this will be a really important milestone. And then next, we will prepare for the public meeting. So ICER will host a public meeting on March 26th, and all patients and community members are invited. Prior to the meeting, they will post the meeting agenda and discussion questions so that we as the community can be informed on what is going to happen specifically at the meeting. During this time, we'll be reviewing the material and ensuring that we are prepared. Also, ICER will invite several patients, advocates, and clinical experts to give oral comments during the meeting. And those wishing to speak at the meeting and share their story in this larger forum can contact ICER via email. So again, how can you get involved in this? Well, you can volunteer to speak at the public meeting. Please let us know if you'd like to speak, and we can talk to you about how you can go about contacting ICER and submitting your recommendations. Additionally, you can plan to attend. We need as many advocates as we can to show up for the community. So if you're interested, please let us know, and you can join us and attend in person. And then the next step will be the day of the public meeting. Again, this is March 26th, and it will be hosted in Boston. The meeting will also be live webcasted though, so we ask community members to join from home. During the meeting, there will be a voting panel, and they will vote on the overall assessment of value for these treatments. And at the meeting, patients, caregivers, and advocates will have time to share their stories. There will be 2 to 3 patients or advocates in the front and in the center of the entire public meeting to provide their perspective and ensure that the panel is considering from the patient perspective. Additionally, there's 5 public speaking slots that will occur before the voting. And this is where people can share their stories. Public comments will be limited to 5 minutes per person. After the voting, there's also a discussion that will inform the policy implications. And then those conversations will be included in the final report. So all of this is really important for us as a community to show up and show up as a united front. So how do you get involved? Either join us in person or tune in for the day of the meeting and join the conversations that will occur. And then finally, the last milestone of this timeline is when ICER will produce the final evidence report. The final report will also be published with a summary of the meeting. And so these become really important documents because these are the final documents that will be utilized by payers and other stakeholders. Additionally, we as the community need to stay involved and engaged on this topic of value assessments, because as more treatments continue to come down the pipeline and make their way to the market to be approved for sickle cell disease, value assessments may continue to be important determiners of access and coverage and price of these new treatments. So as a community, we need to use any lessons learned from this ICER review in order to better prepare for future sickle cell disease reviews in the future. And so how do we get involved, stay engaged on the topic, and ensure that you're informed and updated as new treatments continue to come down the pipeline? So as summary, there's really 3 major action items that we have for our community right now. The first one we're asking patients and caregivers to complete the survey. Again, the survey will be live next Thursday, and this will be online, available for 2 weeks. This will impact the ICER report in several ways. First, it will allow ICER to have a more accurate measurement of the impact of sickle cell disease on day-to-day activities. Additionally, the survey will give caregivers a voice, which may be missing from clinical trial data. And then this survey will help ICER put a price tag on some of the expenses that result from sickle cell disease that are not often captured. We talked about these in our Part 3 webinar, looking at the cost of sickle cell disease. But specifically, we're hoping that this survey will help calculate how much out-of-pocket costs you spend. So how much money comes out of your cash and out of your pocket in order to help manage your sickle cell disease. Again, these are really important areas that may be lacking data. So by completing this survey, you can help inform these really important areas of the report. The second action item is to submit your story during the public comment period. This period opens on January 22nd and closes on February 19th. By writing your narrative and sharing it with ICER, they can learn more about the negative impacts that may be missing from clinical trial data. For example, as patients and advocates, we know the profound impact that fatigue has on patients' lives. Fatigue results in patients being unable to go to school, participate in activities like church or social events, and many other day-to-day things. By sharing your story during this public comment period, you can talk about how critical these components are and how important it is to be able to have new treatments that may help reduce fatigue or other impacts of sickle cell disease. Additionally, you can share specific stories about the cost of your sickle cell disease. Write about how much it costs you each time you need to miss work, or share stories about expensive hospital bills that have resulted from treating sickle cell disease. All of this will help paint the picture for ICER and help them understand the larger impact of the disease and how important new treatments are. Lastly, attend the public meeting, either in person or online. The discussions at the meeting will influence the final reports and the policy implications. Additionally, by sharing oral comments and answering questions from the patient's perspective, we can ensure that we're influencing the way that the voting panel understands this disease. So the last piece that we really want to call out again is this topic of out-of-pocket costs. We understand that this is often difficult because to treat sickle cell disease is a large burden. And you may recall from our Part 3 that we have asked patients to try to begin to capture some of these costs. Well, the survey that we are fielding will also include some of these questions. So we want to highlight that out-of-pocket costs can include deductibles, co-pays, co-insurance for covered services, plus any cost that you have for non-covered expenses. So this is an example of information that we could collect, or we're looking to collect, regarding out-of-pocket costs. So on average, how much do you spend out of pocket per month for sickle cell disease and its complications of the following? For example, how much do you spend on medications, both prescription and over-the-counter? How much do you spend on vitamins or nutritional supplements that may not be covered by your health insurance? Do you pay for any caregivers or any kind of support services that require you to spend money? Do you have needs for specific medical supplies that may have co-insurance or deductibles associated with them? Are there improvements that you've needed to do to your home that have costed additional expenses? What is the cost of the transportation and parking for you to get to and from all of your doctor's appointments or rehab visits? Do you have to participate in other pain management techniques such as massage, yoga, or meditation? And are there any other costs that maybe we haven't captured in this list? So again, we are urging our community to start thinking about this so that ICER and other other people who are conducting value assessments can really get a better understanding of what is the direct burden of sickle cell disease on families. I hope that Ashley now can walk us through an example of some of the calculations that she's done to start looking at some of these things. Ashley, would you be able to chime in and walk us through some of the problems that you've done? And then additionally, sorry, before Ashley steps in, I encourage you to utilize the area on the platform with questions. We already have some questions in there now, so please type your questions into us, and after Ashley walks through this example, we will take some time to answer these questions and have a discussion about the material we presented. Thanks, Ashley.
Great, thanks, Maggie. So the next slide is going to show that my older brother Marcus has sickle cell disease, and we did this quickly this week, tried to calculate some of his expenses. The challenge was that we hit our deductible every year, and so as of Q4, so towards the end of the year in October, all of his medical expenses were covered at 100%. Maggie, could you flip to the next slide? Great. So okay, so some examples of this would be Marcus's medications, his prescriptions. So far this month, we've had to get his pain meds, and that's about $84 we spend out of pocket each month. And Marcus also suffers from leg ulcers, and the wound care is pretty expensive. So it costs about $1,303 that we have to pay out of pocket for the wound care. And some of those items are not covered by insurance. So he uses ACE wraps, for instance, to keep the wound bandages on his legs. And then he also gets specialty shoes. He doesn't get the specialty shoes every month, but they're pretty pricey because they have to shape them to his foot. And so sometimes we can get a payment plan. He has home access portacaths, and that costs $2,600 for the supplies. And so that's the flushing, the salines, the IV bags, all those sorts of things. And then he's also on 6-week apheresis blood exchanges. And so to access his port and to type in cross, it's about $270 for that. And the CBC to do typing and crossing is about $380 a month. So some of these charges, once we hit the $10,000 out of pocket, start getting covered by insurance at 100%. And then we did a calculation for his doctor's appointments in terms of gasoline. And we spend about $65 or $70 a month on gasoline. And that is to go to and from the hospital. And he's in pulmonary rehab right now. So we go to the hospital 6 times a week, round trip for pulmonary rehab. Once a month, he goes to a podiatrist, and then we use 2 different specialty pharmacies. So we have to drive back and forth to those specialty pharmacies once a month to pick up prescriptions. And then he has a regular CVS, which is in town. So sometimes we walk there. So that's kind of a snapshot of what we do to keep in looking at expenses. And then the final piece on here is that monthly we spend $60 for massages for Marcus so that he can mitigate some of his pain during the winter months in Chicago. So that's what I have, Maggie.
Great, thank you, Ashley. That's really helpful. So before we move into the questions, I do just want to highlight, so that these are ways that we can stay engaged. Please stay tuned to our SICKLE's website and social media pages. As we talked about, that survey will be pushed out next Thursday, and we'll be sending it out on our website using our social media. And then additionally, we'll be sending it out to all of the attendees for our webinar series. And then we'll encourage you to send it out to your communities and get as many people as we can to fill out that survey. Also, if you're interested, please join PIPC's webinar, which is next Thursday as well, from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. This slide deck will include webinar details and information. If you're interested, you can RSVP to the email address that I've included on this slide, and we will send out this information as follow-up from our webinar as well. And as always, please reach out to me. As you know, we want you to stay engaged, and if you send me an email, we can make sure that you're on our listserv and you're aware of all of these events in the future. So now let's just take some time to answer some of the questions that we have submitted to us. So the first one says, how will patients and caregivers be advised about the survey? And how can listeners to the webinar help with this process? So that's a great question. And again, the survey will be live next Thursday. We'll be pushing it out on SICKLE's social media pages. Additionally, we've partnered with the SCDAA to create a task force. So you may see the survey pushed out from other sickle cell disease community groups as well. And then lastly, we will be sending it out to all of our webinar attendees and people who have signed up. So we hope that all of this will really help get the word out about the survey. Again, it's open for 2 weeks, and so we really hope that this will be a community effort to ensure that we can get the data that we need.
Great. And this is Ashley. Just to add what Maggie's saying, for every one person with sickle cell, also think about their network. So my family personally will be able to complete the survey 4 times. So my brother Marcus will be completing it in terms of a patient. My mother will be completing it in terms of a caregiver because she has different days of work missed and other sorts of ways it impacts her. My father will be completing it as a caregiver, and I'll be completing it as his sister who has also been impacted by sickle cell disease. So when thinking about the community, we definitely could do reach one, teach one style, where if you fill it out, try to have a friend do it or a caregiver or someone else that is with you in terms of sickle cell disease.
That's great. Thanks, Ashley. And then the last question looks at, it's more of a common and I think a really important one. And it says, add mental health services to the list of costs since they are generally not included by insurance. Thank you for bringing up that point. So I think that would be a great area for the other costs. And please calculate what you spend on any mental health services that may not be covered by insurance. So any money that you're spending out of pocket, and include that in the other costs section of this example. Now, that's all the questions that I see in here. Please know that we'll give it a few more minutes and see if there's anyone else that submits them. But please know that we are available via email if anything else comes up. And then additionally, like we said, this webinar is being recorded. It will be published on our website by the afternoon. So please share this video as well. If you feel that you've learned valuable information, then hopefully others in your community can learn from the video as well. Ashley, is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we sign off?
I think you covered all of it. This is an exciting time for sickle cell disease because we have real medications that we're able to work towards getting for everyone in our community. So thank you so much, Maggie, for taking the time to educate on this.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks everyone for attending. Oh, we have one more question, and it says, are meals in the hospital included in costs? Yeah, again, that's a great consideration, and I would include it in other costs. So if it's an expense that you would not be spending if not because of the condition of your sickle cell disease, then you can include that. For example, if you need to buy food during your hospitalization, that should be associated with an other costs. And these are all costs that are really important to consider calculating and talking about. And then when we talk about including your story and your narrative for public comments, we will need to talk about all of these things in that story. So it's great that we're starting to think about all of this, and now let's pull out the bills and calculate exactly how much that we are spending. Great. And then the last comment is more of a comment than a question, and it says, glad to see the collaboration with PIPSI. This is very important that we stay unified as a community. And thank you. We also find the value in having our community be united. And PIPSI has been a really great collaborator and a great organization to bring us all together. So we look forward to having the opportunity to come together on the webinar next Thursday. So again, PIPSI will be talking on some of the specifics in the measures that ICER uses to calculate value. And then you'll be hearing from Ashley from SICKLE's organization and other sickle cell disease community leaders on the webinar as well. So it's really great to see the sickle cell disease community come together and be unified on this topic. Great. Well, that's all of the comments we have today. Oh, wait, sorry, one more. And then we have one additional comment that says, remember to include insurance premiums. Yes, that would be an out-of-pocket expense as well. Thank you for that comment. And we can actually consider potentially including more information, specifically calling that out, because that might be an important piece. Great. I think that's all we have then. So again, thank you all for attending. We really appreciate it. It's a really important topic, but we need efforts from everyone in the community. So thank you for dialing in, and we look forward to staying engaged with you in the coming months. Thanks. Bye.